I'm going to, hey everybody, I'm going to talk to you today about your hand building assignment that you will do for intermediate level ceramics. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you through a PowerPoint. So it takes me a second to get my screen up to share. Okay. All right, so like I told you before, we are going to shift gears and focus a little bit on sculpture and how sculpture and clay work together, give you a different experience and a different mindset, exposing you to all these different possibilities in clay is going to help you develop your style and your interest even further. So when we talk about sculpture for this unit, we're specifically going to focus on abstract sculpture. That's really important. So before we talk about it or I show you examples, it's something that we need to make sure we can define. When we hear the term sculpture, we all know what that means. When we hear the term abstract, you're like, yeah, I'm familiar with it, but can we actually sit down and define it well enough to actually, construct something that is an abstract sculpture? So by definition terms, a sculpture is a three-dimensional piece of artwork that is designed only for aesthetic pleasure or display, and it holds absolutely no functional purpose at all. So if whatever you constructed, pours or holds something or, is meant for a plant or is meant to put food on, then you have not made a sculpture. A sculpture is something for us to observe and look at to gain insight, emotion, have kind of a cognitive or an emotional response, but that's it. Abstract, okay, is artwork that moves away from realities, realistic interpretations. It's artwork that's very generalized, that's oftentimes more like simplified, but basically, we don't want to be able to recognize what it is. If I look at a sculpture and I think, oh, wow, that's a rose, then I haven't gotten abstract enough. We're going to be inspired by things that are real, but we want to simplify our design enough where it really just becomes like a shape. And that takes us to kind of our next couple of slides. I'm going to use two artists. I'm going to feature two sculpture artists here to help get you started on thinking, what should my abstract sculpture look like? What direction should I go? How should I start, thinking about the shape and the design of it? So I'm going to use two artists, Henry Moore and David Smith. And the reason why I'm using these two is because they're similar in the sense that they make abstract sculpture, but they're opposite in the shapes and the forms that they create. So Henry Moore is known for making abstract sculpture that is based off of very organic shapes and organic forms. David Smith is the opposite. He makes abstract sculpture that is based off of geometry, geometric shapes, geometric forms. That's where I kind of want your brain to start thinking. Are you more attracted to that organic form? Are you more attracted to those geometric shapes? That's a really good starting off point when designing your sculpture. So let's first look at Henry Moore. So he is, again, an abstract sculptor who really focuses on organic shapes. Some of his shapes are indeed still a little bit recognizable, like this one in the corner. We know we're looking at a figure, that it's kind of like, a reclining figure, but it's only because we recognize this, shoulder, neck, and head corner. Right away our brain identifies, oh, that's kind of like a human form. And then the rest of it gets like a little bit jumbled. We can maybe say, oh, that's part of the arm, but the rest of it gets jumbled up. And that's exactly how you need to think of abstraction. It's like a spectrum that Sometimes we might be in the middle of the spectrum where we have a little bit of evidence of what we're looking at and, evidence of something completely, foreign. But then, the other end of the spectrum might be something that is literally just a shape. Like, we really don't identify with it specifically at all. But, we may be able to get feelings from it, like, oh, it kind of feels like a pelvic bone, or some sort of cave opening, right? Like, we may get those types of feelings from it, but really, it's unidentifiable, and that's what we want. David Smith is the same way, but he only works with geometric shapes. So in his work, you're going to see this like combination of rectangles, squares, circles, triangles, and then how he puts them together to create a full sculpture is really how he tackles abstraction. The other thing you are going to have to work into your sculpture. So the first thing you're going to think about is, do I want to go, do I want to go organic or geometric, knowing you have to stay abstract. The third thing you need to think about is negative space. You have to work with negative space and your sculpture. That's part of what makes a sculpture is all of the empty space that goes around the sculpture, through a sculpture. All of that is very important part of the planning process. So I want to make sure that you are definitely thinking about that. Negative space can happen, in a variety of ways. Sometimes the negative space is actually more interesting than the positive space. So if we look here at these three vases, we have, three ceramic vases, and they are very interesting forms. But if we force our eye to look away from the positive and pay attention to the negative space that's in between them, can you guys see the side profiles of a boy and a girl child? Okay, so this is a great example of an artist who is not just paying attention to the positive space, to the thing that he or she is making, but that the artist is paying very close attention to the empty space that happens around it. The same with these two positive and negative space exercises. It's like, what do you see first? Do you see the vase or do you see the faces? That's an age-old kind of brain switch that we do to help us practice how to do that shift with our eyes and with our brain, how to see the positive, how to see the negative. Finding negative space in a sculpture can happen in many different ways. Negative space can actually take place through the artwork, where the positive space is completely like engulfing the negative space inside of it. It can happen like within and around it, okay, like all around it, and come down, deep and kind of jet to the inside, and then follow through around it. Or it can happen just between two artworks. So this negative space, like the vases, is created because you made two forms that were solid forms, and then the way that the two forms interact with each other is what's creating the negative space. So here are just some examples of Henry Moore and David Smith when working with negative space that kind of darts through the artwork. Here you can kind of see it's almost like a figure 8. Here it's completely enclosed by positive space. That's what's happening here, is that the negative space is completely enclosed by the positive space. Here's some examples of negative space that happen in between two sculptures. So the negative space that is existing between these two sculptural forms, or between this one and this one, We've already looked at this piece, okay? We see negative space in this sculpture that happens in both ways, right? We have negative space that's, you know, trapped on the inside, right? But then we have negative space that happens between this sculpture and then the sculpture behind it and the sculpture behind it, okay? So a lot of things happening here. When you do your sculpture and when it's complete, you have to decide either to treat your sculpture in a solid white or a solid black. The reason for that is because by taking away too much interest and decoration on the surface, we as the viewer are able to just really focus on your sculpture, on your form. And that's what we want. That's what this unit is all about, okay? So we're not gonna do any fancy colors. We're not gonna be underglazing any sort of patterns or anything on it at all. You need to decide ahead of time, does my sculpture call to be solid white or solid black? And then the second thing you need to decide, is it going to be solid black by means of glazing it black, or is it going to be solid black by means of brushing black underglaze on it, okay? You have those options. You may use white and black underglaze or white and black glaze. That's up to you, but you need to, you know, decide all of that ahead of time within your sketches. So here's the criteria for your assignment. You're going to create an abstract sculpture, you know, like we said, a piece of artwork that has no functional purpose, and your form has to be very abstracted. I do not want to know what your form was inspired off of. So again, if you were inspired off of, you know, the shape of, you know, a rock or a mountain or a flower, that's fine, but I don't want to know it. I don't want to see it. Your sculpture must be between 9 and 12 inches in either direction. So now we're going to build something that's larger. And if you're going to build a sculpture that is vertical, then I will measure 9 to 12 inches in height. But sometimes we want sculptures that are more horizontal in nature. So if you build something that is more horizontal, then try to, you know, make 9 to 12 inches in width, okay? Your sculpture must incorporate negative space. So we've talked about that. You have to incorporate it somehow, whether you know, make the negative space go through your sculpture, or whether it somehow, you know, curves and follows around your sculpture, or if you're going to build two smaller sculptures and then the way that they're placed and interact will create negative space in between them. That is up to you. Now that you have learned 6 methods of hand building, now you get to pick your method. You may use any method that is necessary, any method that you prefer, any method that you like, and you may need a combination of methods. You may have one part of your sculpture that's, you know, very kind of straight and angular, and you think that hard slab is going to work best, but then maybe the other part of your sculpture is very curvy and organic. And so maybe for that part, you're going to be using, you know, pinch and paddle or sculpt and hollow or something like that. And then, you know, these separate parts will be, you know, scored together to create one sculpture. So that's how you build it, is totally up to you. Your sculpture will be glazed or underglazed, either all black or white. We've already discussed that. Your sculpture may consist of one large piece or multiple pieces that, you know, interact or work together. And last but not least, actually one of the most important points is your sculpture must have volume, okay? So volume means that it has height, it has width, and it has depth, okay? So this right here is something that has just width and height, right? There's absolutely no depth to it. If I get a sculpture that's like this, then you will not pass this unit at all. Your sculpture has to have volume, okay? Now my paper towel has volume because it has height, it has width, and now it has depth, okay? It should be hollow inside your sculpture, okay? If it's a flat sculpture and it's not hollow, then you have not met the requirements. So that's very, very important to understand. Hopefully this is going to get your mind going. You need to research some ideas. You need to figure out your inspiration. You need to base your sculpture off of something real that you're going to then, you know, simplify and abstract. And then you're going to be working on your sketches and get those turned into me so that we can review them. If you have any questions, email me and let me know. Good luck. Thank you.